Phantasm. The delusion of a disordered mind. A phantom. A spirit. A ghost.
In the first movie of this series, the residents of a small town have begun dying under mysterious circumstances, leading the young boy Mike to investigate. After discovering that the town's mortician, known as the Tall Man, is killing and reanimating the dead, Mike seeks help from his older brother Jody and a local ice cream man, Reggie. Working together, they try to lure out and kill the Tall Man, all while avoiding his zombie minions and a deadly flying silver sphere.
The funeral is about to begin, sir.
Featuring a beautiful Plymouth Hemi-Cuda, a 4-barrel shotgun-toting ice cream man, and a menacing, tall, and creepy antagonist with a ton of iconic flying silver balls of death, the Phantasm series is one of the best and most enduring franchises in all of horror.
Now you die.
With most of the main cast and actors returning and being featured in all 5 films, the quality of the series rarely dips, which can always be a detriment for other franchises. This is extra impressive considering the first film came out in 1979, with the final one being released 37 years later in 2016.
It's only a dream.
It's a dream. No, it's not.
The character of Reggie would go on to become a great horror hero on par with the character of Ash from the Evil Dead series. His character becomes the main heart of the series, and really gives the audience someone to root for in each of the films.
No, this won't hurt a bit. Well, maybe just a little bit.
Combine that with the great villain of the Tall Man, and the unforgettable killer flying spheres, and the Phantasm series is definitely deserving of the number 10 spot in the top 10 horror franchises of all time.
The sci-fi horror thriller with balls.
Boy.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
In the first Saw movie, a photographer and an oncologist wake up in a dark and dirty bathroom while chained to pipes at either end. The two men soon realize that they've been trapped by a sadistic serial killer named Jigsaw.
He doesn't want us to cut through our chains. He wants us to cut through our feet.
Oh my god! Oh my...
Jigsaw then forces them to complete his perverse puzzle to live, while flashbacks reveal the fates of his previous victims. Meanwhile, the doctor's wife and young daughter are forced to watch his torture via closed-circuit video. That first Saw movie is intense and suspenseful, with a great twist ending.
Technically speaking, he never killed anyone. He finds ways for his victims to kill themselves.
Working off a low budget, it would become one of the highest-grossing movies of the year, and spawn 8 sequels, with the latest one set to be released within the near future.
Live or die. Make your choice.
For 7 years, the Saw franchise owned the Halloween movie season, with a new installment of the series being released every year. The low cost of the production of the movies pretty much guaranteed a high return at the box office for as long as the movies remained popular.
If a subject survives my method, he or she is instantly rehabilitated.
The character of Jigsaw would go on to become an icon of the new millennium of horror. The movies would coin a new subgenre of horror known as torture porn.
Those who don't appreciate life do not deserve life.
They have certainly left their mark and continue to inspire newer filmmakers today. They will always make us want to answer the question of whether or not we want to play one of Jigsaw's games.
Let the games begin.
Secretary Marion Crane is fleeing after stealing $40,000 from her employer in order to run away with her boyfriend, Sam Loomis. She buys a new car and soon gets caught in a heavy rainstorm, Traveling on the back roads to avoid the police, she stops for the night at the small Bates Motel and meets the polite but odd proprietor, Norman Bates, a young man with an interest in taxidermy and possessing a difficult relationship with his mother.
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
One fateful shower later, and Psycho would then transform itself into a landmark of horror cinema.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
The original Psycho movie by Alfred Hitchcock is one of the great masterpieces of horror. It made an entire generation afraid to take a shower the same way Jaws made people afraid to go into the ocean. The shower scene is one of the true iconic moments of horror, with a great soundtrack to go with it. The great twist at the end would give Anthony Perkins one of the most memorable roles in horror, and he would go on to give equally great performances in the next 3 sequels.
No, I won't do that. You can't make me kill her.
The first Psycho sequel, released 23 years after the original, is one of the best sequels I have ever seen and is just as pleasing to watch as the first movie, with another great ending.
Yes, Mother. It's me.
While the quality of the other films may be questionable, Anthony Perkins always gives a great performance and makes the movies well worth a watch.
How'd you kill your mother?
Slowly.
That's why the Psycho series is one of my favorites and worthy of a spot in my top 10.
Why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
I have seen the dark shadows moving in the woods, and I have no doubt that whatever I have resurrected through this book is sure to come calling for me.
Ashley Ash Williams, played by the great Bruce Campbell, his girlfriend Linda, and 3 friends drive into the woods to a cabin for a fun night away. There they find an old book bound in human flesh and inked in blood called the Necronomicon, whose text reawakens and possesses the dead when it's read aloud.
It is through recitation of these passages that the demons are given license to possess the living.
The friends inadvertently release the evil from the book and must fight for their lives or become one of the evil dead.
What the hell happened to you? Cheryl, what's the matter with you? Did something in the woods do this to you?
No, it was the woods themselves. They're alive, Ashley.
Ash watches his friends become possessed one by one and must make a difficult decision before dawn in order to save his own life in the first of Sam Raimi's great trilogy.
Groovy.
The first movie of this series is a landmark in independent horror, and the next movies would each outdo the other in their own way, with Evil Dead 2 being more of a horror comedy and Army of Darkness being more of a horror fantasy adventure. There would also be a remake released in 2013 that would take the series back to its terror roots, and it is one of the better remakes of the genre. Bruce Campbell would also return as Ash in the Starz series Ash vs. Evil Dead in 2015 for 3 seasons.
All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up. This is my boomstick!
There is not a weak installment in the entire series, and the character of Ash continues to be one of the most iconic heroes in all of horror.
Good. Bad. I'm the guy with the gun.
When you have a chainsaw for a hand and a boomstick in the other, the cool factor is definitely on your side.
Groovy.
Another movie installment has recently been announced, and that is sure to be another great watch in one of the greatest horror series ever produced.
I'll swallow your soul! I'll swallow your soul!
Swallow this.
alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Released in 1931, the first iconic Universal horror film of this series follows the mad scientist Dr. Henry Frankenstein as he attempts to create life by assembling a creature from body parts grave robbed of the deceased. Helped by his loyal hunchback assistant Fritz, Frankenstein succeeds in animating his great monster, played by Boris Karloff in his breakout role, but confused and possessing an abnormal brain, it escapes into the countryside and begins to wreak havoc on the local villagers.
Crazy, am I? We'll see whether I'm crazy or not.
Frankenstein searches for the elusive creature and eventually must confront his tormented creation. The original Frankenstein series of movies is among the most historical and iconic in all of horror. It was the original series to bring true terror to audiences starting all the way back in the 30s. It is the most successful and prolific series of the original Universal horror monsters and maintains a high level of quality with each film. Bride of Frankenstein is highly regarded as one of the best sequels ever made.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
Each film has some of the best actors of their time, and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman kicked off the very first cinematic universe of films.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
This universe reaches its zenith with the final film of this franchise in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948. This classic film can be considered the first horror comedy and brings together the classic monsters of Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman, with even the Invisible Man making a quick cameo at the end. It features only the second and last cinematic performance of the great Bela Lugosi as Dracula, and has as great an ending as any horror franchise can ask for, inspiring even greater franchises in the years to come. This landmark horror series of cinema more than earns its place in the top 10.
I love dead. Hate living.
You're wise in your generation.
There's nothing nice about murder. And there's nothing innocent about child's play.
Gunned down by a detective, dying murderer Charles Lee Ray, played by the great Brad Dourif, uses black magic to put his soul inside a buddy doll named Chucky, which an unsuspecting mother then buys for her young son, Andy.
I am Chucky, the killer doll!
When Chucky kills Andy's babysitter, the boy realizes that his new doll is alive, and he tries to warn people, but he's institutionalized. Now his mom must convince the detective of the existence of the murderous doll, before Andy becomes Chucky's next victim, and the next vessel for the killer's soul.
Give me the power, I beg of you!
The greatness of the Child's Play series is the ongoing story of the killer doll, Chucky.
It's a long story.
Aside from the recent remake, all the movies in the series are written by Don Mancini, which provides the series with great continuity.
I'm fucking infamous!
Once the series starts getting named for Chucky and drops the Child's Play title, each installment offers something new and different from the previous one. The introduction of killer doll Tiffany in Bride of Chucky breathes new life into the series, and her character soon becomes just as iconic as Chucky himself.
Life sure is full of surprises.
After the events of the most recent film, which ended in a bit of a cliffhanger, a new television series will soon be released further exploring these characters and expanding the mythology in this great and ongoing franchise that started in 1988.
I'm one of the most notorious slashers in history.
The length of this franchise, its iconic status, and the continuing installments of the series has this franchise earning its place in the top half of my top 10 horror franchises.
Ugly doll.
Fuck you.
Halloween night. A small American town, 15 years ago.
Michael?
Halloween.
On Halloween night in 1963, 6-year-old Michael Myers brutally murdered his 17-year-old sister, Judith. He was then locked away in an institution for 15 years.
I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
But on October 30th, 1978, while being transferred for a court date, a now adult Michael Myers steals a car and escapes. He returns to his quiet hometown of Haddonfield, Illinois, donning a simple white mask where he looks for his next victims, including that of Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis in her first starring role.
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
The very first Halloween movie has to be the most iconic in all of slasher horror. It has spawned a franchise that has released 11 theatrical movies, with 2 more soon to be released within the next 2 years. The memorable theme song can be considered to be the finest in all of horror. Laurie Strode is also known as one of the best final girls of all time. Even after the series gets a little tired every now and again, a new semi-reboot gets released to install new life into the series, such as the most recent installment in 2018.
I prayed that he would burn in hell, but in my heart, I knew that hell would not have him.
Even though the Halloween series is probably the most well-known horror franchise, the inconsistent quality of the movies and multiple restarts of continuity keeps the series out of my top 3. Starting with the third film, the series starts to branch off in multiple directions and continuities that essentially turn the Halloween franchise into a choose-your-own-adventure series. However, just like Michael Myers, the Halloween franchise never stays dead for long, and always finds a way to come back.
Hello?
Hello?
Who is this?
Tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
I don't think so.
What's that noise?
Popcorn.
You making popcorn?
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
In 1996, writer Kevin Williamson and director Wes Craven reinvented and revitalized the slasher horror genre with this modern horror classic, which manages to be funny, clever, and scary.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex.
The movie starts with the finest opening scene in all of horror, and shocks the audience into believing that no one is safe and that anything can happen.
Do you like scary movies?
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
As a ghost-faced, knife-wielding maniac stalks high school students in the remote town of Woodsboro, a whodunit takes place as the cast tries to figure out who the killer is as they all start to die one by one.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
With the first few sequels, the Scream franchise single-handedly revitalized the entire horror genre that had been on a downward trend in the 90s, with each film being a commentary on certain aspects of the genre.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
No, Billy!
Fuck! After the initial trilogy, a fourth film was released a decade later to add another self-aware take on reboots and remakes that had been happening more widely during that time period. With each movie being directed by Wes Craven, and with the main surviving characters returning for each one, the quality and continuity of this series remains higher than any other franchise in horror.
Hello, Sydney. Remember me?
With the announcement of a new movie planning to be released within the next few years, the Scream series continues to live on. Even with the sad passing of Wes Craven, the willingness of cast members to keep returning to this series almost guarantees that the quality of movies will remain to be high.
Watch a few movies, take a few notes.
As Sidney Prescott, Neve Campbell will go on as possibly the greatest final girl in all of horror, starring and surviving in each installment of the series. The sheer force of creative nature that keeps the quality of each movie insanely high earns this franchise my number 3 spot.
Friday, the 13th. You may only see it once, but that will be enough. Friday, the 13th.
In the first movie of this classic and iconic horror series, Crystal Lake's history of murder doesn't deter a young group of counselors from setting up a summer camp in the woodsy area. Superstitious locals warn against it, but the fresh-faced and lusty young people pay little heed to Crazy Ralph.
You're doomed. You're all doomed.
Then, they find themselves stalked by a brutal killer. As they're slashed, maimed, and stabbed, the counselors struggle to stay alive against a merciless and unseen killer.
Some folks have a strange idea of entertainment.
If Halloween started the slasher craze, then the Friday the 13th series launched it into the stratosphere. With 8 installments released in the decade with varying degrees of quality, Friday the 13th lorded over 80s horror. After a brief cameo in the first movie, the character of Jason Voorhees will go on to become one of the titans of horror, donning his iconic hockey mask for the first time in Part 3. The image of the machete-wielding hockey mask killer would live on as one of the most recognizable and greatest in all of horror. Since the remake that was released in 2009, the franchise has remained stagnant and caught in litigation hell, preventing another movie from being released for the time being. However, that will eventually pass, and just like Jason Voorhees himself, there will be no stopping this behemoth of a franchise from returning from the dead with a new movie in the near future. The only thing keeping this series out of my top spot is the franchise performance of Jason's greatest rival in horror.
Director of The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left, a new masterpiece in fantasy terror, Nightmare on Elm Street.
In Wes Craven's classic slasher film, several teenagers fall prey to Freddy Krueger, played by the charismatic Robert Englund, a disfigured fedora-wearing murderer known as the Springwood Slasher, who preys on the teenagers in their dreams, which in turn kills them in reality.
Please, God.
This is God.
After investigating the phenomenon, Nancy begins to suspect that a dark secret kept by her and her friend's parents may be the key to solving the mystery, and finally defeating Freddy Krueger once and for all. Released in 1984, A Nightmare on Elm Street is quite possibly the most unique and best horror film ever made.
There's big break in TV. Welcome to prime time, bitch.
The story terrorized audiences, and throughout the sequels, Freddy Krueger became a household name.
Every kid knows who Freddy is. He's like Santa Claus.
Each movie launched Freddy more and more into the spotlight, giving us a killer who is not only scary, but also funny. The success of these movies single-handedly turned a small movie studio into a major player in Hollywood. There's a reason why New Line Cinema is known as the house that Freddy built. No other horror franchise can lay claim to that honor.
Wanna suck the face?
No.
With the rights of Freddy Krueger recently reverting to the Craven estate, rumors continue to run rampant on the possibility of Robert Englund returning for at least one more movie as Freddy. His last movie as Freddy was when his character finally faced off against that other titan of 80s horror, Jason Voorhees, in Freddy vs. Jason from 2003. If that movie should ever come, you can be certain that it will be the king of the box office just like the Freddy films of old. Even though Freddy may have lost his fight against Jason in Freddy vs. Jason, the massive success of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and the continued adoration of the Freddy character, has let A Nightmare on Elm Street claim the top spot as my top horror franchise of all time.
I'm back and I'm better!